Hello everyone, this is Kevin here, co-founder of Rebound with Resilience. And today we are very honored to have with us Dr. Lim Choon Guan. Dr. Lim is a senior consultant and deputy chief of department of child and adolescent psychiatry at Institute of Mental Health. Yes, and not just that, he's also an adjunct assistant professor at NTU, where he teaches a course on mental health awareness. It's a very popular course because of his sincerity, because of his heart to add value to students. Okay, so today, Dr. Lim, we're going to focus on mental resilience, building mental resilience and positive mental health in youth. So before we get started on it, let's just explore what the terms mean. So what is, to the viewers watching, what is positive mental health and what is resilience?
So positive mental health doesn't just talk about the absence of mental illness. It also refers to the ability of an individual to deal with the day-to-day hassles of life, the daily stresses that one faces, and the ability of a person to basically fulfill the daily roles, within the family, at work, in school, etc., and to be able to balance all this well. It also looks into the ability of a person basically to fulfill his or her own potential in the different things that he or she wants to do. Resilience. Resilience talks about the ability of a person to bounce back from an adversity, from a negative event, because life sometimes has ups and downs, right? So resilience is really the ability to be able to manage, to deal with and adapt to stress, and to bounce back, and get on track again. Yeah.
Okay, and is there any link between the both, resilience and positive mental health?
Because resilience talks about the ability to manage stress and to bounce back from adversity. When we talk about positive mental health, it's really about being able to deal with stresses, deal with daily life hassles. So for a person who is, say, vulnerable to develop mental illness, what happens is that we find usually mental illness symptoms actually start off soon after a certain stress in the person's life. So when a person actually can be more resilient, can manage and adapt to stress better, then this is actually protective against the onset of mental illness and the maintenance of a positive mental health.
Okay, yeah. Great. Thanks for the explanation. Yeah. So next question is, why is this important? Why is it a priority maybe for a parent or for a student?
I mean, for parents, educators, even professionals, we talk about the term resilience because life inherently is full of stress, right? There are always certain, be it in academics, in relationships, and sometimes one faces difficult moments. So by talking about resilience and by teaching one some of the ways to be resilient, then we basically help the person to be able to maintain a good state of mental health and to be able to ultimately prevent mental illness. And this helps the person basically to be able to lead a fulfilling life.
Yes.
Yeah.
Great. And I would presume also as a parent yourself, right? A child's happiness, his character, his mental health might be more important than, say, just academic success or anything, or the other external factors.
Yeah. I mean, that's definitely true. In fact, personally, soon after the birth of my first child, I still remember the neonatologist coming in and saying that, wow, your child has a heart murmur. We're not sure if this might settle. So at that time, I realized how, all I wanted really is for my child to be physically healthy. And I've told myself that, whatever it is about my child, right, I will accept. Yeah. And I will be able to, I really want to guide my child to be able to, have a fulfilling life. And so whenever, little things that come along, when I get upset with my kid, and that's a promise I remember to myself, that I will accept whatever my child is.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for sharing. Yeah. So Yeah, so that's great. So moving on, right, before we talk about the solutions, before we talk about how to build resilience, maybe we can explore the problem a little bit deeper.
Okay.
So, in Singapore's context, what is some of the common issues or factors that could affect, a youth's mental health negatively?
Okay. Perhaps let's start with looking at some of the common stresses in a young person's life today. I think as a student yourself, you'll be well aware, right, about first the academic stress. Yeah. Experience it for myself, as a parent, anxiety around the child's education. A little embarrassed to say that I actually missed my kids, my first kid's kindergarten registration. So sometimes as a parent myself, having been through the process of primary school registration, it tells you how stressful, in fact, navigating the education system is, not just for the child, but for parents as well. There's other than academic stresses, some of the other common areas of stresses include relationships. And relational problems can sometimes occur within the family or with peers, and sometimes with romantic partners. So these are some of the common stresses. I think schooling today is really not easy. Decisions have to be made at so many different points, right? Soon after primary school, one has to decide which secondary school to go to, which, if one does well, then to go on the integrated program or not, etc. And some of these decisions to a young person can be rather major, right? During, I think when I was younger, my parents, sometimes tell me, if you don't study well, you might end up with a lower paying job, right? Some job that maybe people may not be interested to do. Sometimes I hear parents today say, well, if you don't study hard enough, right, you may not only just have to get a lower paying job, but such jobs might not even be available because there will be automation and robots that will take over these jobs. This tells you really sometimes how the level of stress is.
Okay. Yeah, I fully can identify that. Growing up in a kind of education system, it's always a pressure to perform. And if you don't do your best, you feel as if you're losing out, in other areas as well. Yeah. So, but is there any? So the next question, right, is there for a parent maybe? Is there any warning signs or symptoms that a child might exhibit? If he's facing, stress or anxiety, like you mentioned.
Okay. So sometimes when a child is stressed, it might affect the child's daily habits. So for example, the child might not be able to sleep as well. The child's appetite might be affected, might be eating less. The child might also be quieter or might even be more withdrawn. Or sometimes the child might even start to lose interest in some of the things that he or she may be regularly enjoying. One of the things, of course, about feeling stress or prolonged stress is that whether this might actually adversely affects the child's mental health, such that certain mental illnesses such as depression might even come on. So if a child is depressed, what happens is that these children, in addition to some of the symptoms I mentioned earlier, they might even be socially withdrawn, frequently crying. Some of them might even have negative thoughts. Yeah.
I think you mentioned about depression, right? And depression is statistically the most common mental condition in Singapore. Is it right to say that with the IMH statistics, or is that a misrepresentation?
Okay, so generally, epidemiologist studies across the years have shown the depression prevalence to be around 5% of the lifetime risk, right? So if you look at the latest mental health study, it is one of the top 3 mental health conditions in Singapore. So I guess it's fair to say it's one of the commoner mental health problems, yes.
And because I think it's common, but it's also there's a misconception surrounding it. So maybe we just touch a little bit on that? Like what is depression, and what are some common misconceptions with regards to depression?
So sometimes one might not understand about what's the difference between depression or normal sadness, right? So sometimes one might think that this is just a normal sadness, and the person just needs to get over it, or worse still, sometimes there's a misconception that one is just weak, and one therefore just needs to get stronger and just stand up and move on. But depression really is a debilitating form of mental illness. It is very treatable, actually. In terms of the causes, it's not very well understood. So we do know that there could be some genetic contribution and some environmental contribution, but it can be effectively treated. And depression treatment in the young doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be medication, right? There's psychological therapy and sometimes other forms of therapy to help the young person.
Okay. So can I say that depression is not just a psychological disorder? It's also there's some biological aspect to it as well. Which is why you can't treat it as if you're spraining your ankle. You ask the guy to just walk faster. Right. In the same way, you can't just get someone who's depressed to just ask him to get over it. You're weak and everything.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. So now that we've explored mental health in a bit more in depth, now we move on to talk about the solutions. So the first question is, as a parent, are there any parenting blind spots? Anything that they might do unconsciously that affects a kid's mental health?
Well, firstly, I'm sure that every parent wants the best for the child. I think in Singapore today, families are smaller, right? Most families have, one or two children, you see. So the children are precious. And so sometimes, parents do get very much involved in the child's life, which I think is great. But of course, one of the dangers is that the parents might risk becoming too involved and stifle the child's development of certain skills such as independent decision making. So one of the things is that parents probably need to gradually learn as the child grows, how do they actually help the child, right, to make certain decisions and not to take too much control over the child's life. Sometimes people may use the term helicopter parenting. I think that parents don't intend to actually protect their children too much. But it's really about being able to guide the child. And the other thing probably is that many families today, right, actually because of the rising cost of living, both parents are working. This does sometimes make it very hard for parents to really spend enough quality time with their children. Sometimes I do see parents who say that at the end of a busy day when they come back, there's very little time to guide their child on the homework, much less to even communicate or spend time enjoying doing things they like. So it's important to to be able to really balance the little time that they have together and to be able to do things that help to improve the quality of relationship and communication.
Sure.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting you mentioned how the pressures of society that kind of causes it to happen. It's not like parents want to be. Sometimes it's just the environmental context that leads to this, But is there any, you would say, counters to that? Like, for example, helicopter parenting. You mentioned about how you're always controlling the kid, right? Was there any suggestion that you would make, for example, if you feel that the parent feels that it's controlling the kid too much?
Well, what I would say is that first of all, it's really to be aware. All right, and I think is to remember from young, right? That how do I guide the child? I think when the child is younger, indeed they may need more supervision and more decisions have to be taken on by the parents because they are not mature enough to understand things or to make certain independent decisions. They need to be aware that as a child grows, his ability to think for himself increases, particularly when it comes to the teenage period. Yeah, so that's the time when I think parents need to also adjust themselves according to their children's growing abilities. And I think that every child may have a different temperament, right? So the parents also need to understand their child's temperament and then to kind of adjust and move with it. At the end of the day, I think most children will grow up well and be independent thinking adults. Throughout the growing process, however, there are some dangers, of course, to be aware of, right? Particularly specific differences in today's world which might not be present during the parents' younger days. Technology, smartphones, internet. So the young child is actually connected today at a very young age. So I think parents do need to be able to monitor and supervise and guide their children in terms of discerning information online and also controlling the use of gadgets and screen time.
Yeah. So in a way, helping them to be an independent thinker, independent decision maker, right? And that's an important aspect of resilience as well, right? So a key aspect of resilience. Okay, so moving on to the next question, from our surveys that we did with about 700 students, secondary school students, we found that about 63% of them mentioned that they are sometimes reluctant to seek help from their parents. So are you surprised by this this finding, or do you have any thoughts about this finding?
I'm glad to hear you at least you said sometimes, right? Not completely didn't. Well, I think it is probably normal and to be expected. In fact, quite often I do tell young people that I think it is probably normal that we share some things with our parents. There are some issues and things that we feel more comfortable sharing with our peers. Yeah, sometimes it might not be all that bad. I don't think that the young person sometimes intentionally want to keep things from the parents. Sometimes it could be that they don't want their parents to worry. Sometimes it could be that they feel that, hey, this is something I can manage myself. I don't have to necessarily alarm my parents. Yeah. Of course, there could be some other times when they feel that this thing might be too sensitive. My parents might not be too pleased, etc. Yeah. So to basically facilitate, I think, communication with the child, I usually tell parents that this should be something that starts from young, right? So parents may want to look for opportunities to have regular communication with their children, and during the process, I think that especially with teenagers, it's important that parents actually spend more time listening, right? Yeah, hearing out the young person's views, and not to be too quick to jump into help dishing or even judgment. Because sometimes a young teenager may be very perceptive to an adult being too judgmental, too presumptive sometimes, and that may hold them back from sharing too much.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I think it's important you mentioned that it's not just the lack of trust, but it also could be that sometimes they don't want to place a burden on their parents as well, something that I didn't think of. So it's not always a bad thing, I would say. Yeah. But it's glad that you mentioned some ways to communicate better. I was going to ask you that question, but you already answered it.
Sorry, I jumped the gun.
Yeah, no, it's good. You really gave a solution already. Yeah. So on that note, right, another concept that I like to explore on judgment is that sometimes there's a mismatch of expectations between both the parents and the youth. Yeah. When one of them wants to do a particular CCA, a particular course of study, or maybe a stream, and the parents maybe have other ideas from their own perceptions, and that leads to a lot of maybe emotional tension, leads to some frustration, mental frustration on the youth's part. Yeah, so do you have, is it a common occurrence in your experience? And if so, is there any way that you would suggest both from the parent's perspective and from the kid's perspective, right? How do you tackle it? Yeah.
I mean, well, I probably will share from my own experience. I think that these are the various decision points which, are opportunities for the parent to guide the child towards how to make a decision, right? Of course, there are various strategies to be learned. How do you shortlist? For example, if there's a whole list of CCAs, how do I shortlist? What are the possible CCAs? What are the things to think about? The child's interests. What are some of the other considerations? Then, if there are a couple of choices, then what are the pros and cons of each choice? And then this helps the child, to basically work through the decision thinking process. I mean, personally, I think I would, from my perspective, I think it depends on what what kind of skill the parents would like the child to learn. I actually prefer, to let my child learn to make decisions on his own or her own self. And, so whether it is the CCA, and my older one is now in secondary one, so I allow my child to make a decision about which school, as long as I know and communicate, and I'm convinced that my child has thought through certain aspects. Of course, there are always things to think about, right? How far the school is, what time you're going to wake up. Of course, parents usually will check out the standard of the school, etc. One of the things sometimes the fear is, what if the wrong decision is made, right? And that's when I think, weighing certain decisions, pros and cons helps. And sometimes when, let's say, there are a couple of possible choices and one really can't decide, I usually tell the young person, look, if there is a bad choice, when you weigh the decision, right, it will be obvious. If you cannot decide between choices, well, probably both are good choices, right? So regardless, it's really to be brave and make a choice, and also to realize that sometimes there's probably nothing such as a good choice or a bad choice or the wrong choice or the correct choice. But whatever choice is made, towards the end of the day, right, there will be something to be learned from the process. Sure. Yeah.
So in a way, give your kids more information in a way to make decisions, like the pros, the cons, and ultimately, of course, in your perspective, is giving them a bit of autonomy to make that decision.
That's right. And also maybe to guide them through the research process. How do you search for information, right, to help you make the choice? So these are different kind of skill sets I think the parents can, teach their children. Yeah.
Okay. But what if, let's say, I'm a student, for example, and I really want to do this, I have a passion for this, but my parents just very insistent. They don't want me to do this. So how will you advise the student to maybe address the issue in a respectful way, but at the same time, not compromising his or her, mental health?
Usually, of course, it depends on the maturity of the child or teenager. And sometimes, I might do this through a couple of ways. Is to think about, why do you think your parents, are so against your choice? Why do you think that, they are so insistent on their choice? The idea is more to help them see what their parents' concerns or perspectives might be. Yeah, and sometimes, it's also about, whether what is the right time to really discuss this. Yeah, if there's a certain kind of strong disagreement, I might say, look, you might want to find an opportunity to speak to your parents again, help them to understand your perspectives. And during that time, really, it's also to be able to control your own emotions. Yeah, because sometimes when one is heated up or angry, right? Yeah, usually in that instance, no one is really listening, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Find a proper platform to have an intelligent, to have a mature conversation.
Yeah, or sometimes if needed, even could there be a family member who might be able to be the mediator be it another sibling, be it perhaps the other parent, or another relative, or sometimes even thinking about someone from the school. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Okay, so we're coming to the end of the interview. Before that, one very important question. If I'm a parent watching this, how can I build resilience in my kids?
So I think the process of building resilience, we've discussed some of the strategies earlier. So I always like to think about what are some of the skill sets that parents would like to instill in their child, that they would like their child to be equipped with. Yeah. I think the parents, during the growing up processes, other than guiding, just like guiding through the process of decision making, right? It's also to be able to encourage their child, because sometimes the child may experience certain minor setbacks, right? Be it a failure in school, not doing well for an assignment, a test, spelling, etc. So always remember to be encouraging. And when the child, puts in effort, is to recognize the effort rather than the result, and take note of that and to praise the child. This helps the child to actually also build esteem and to know what one's own strength is. Then, of course, allowing their child sometimes to try out their own decisions. Not to be really afraid of failure, because I think that one actually needs sometimes to learn how to take failure. Yeah, and I always feel that it's easier to bounce back from failure in an earlier life with support than to always be smooth sailing and to have experience a setback later on in life.
Okay, thanks. I was going to ask if I'm a student, how can I build my resilience? But I think it's vice versa, right? You just try harder, give it a shot.
I think
as a student, maybe a student's point of view, right? I'm a student, how do I develop my resilience?
I think be it a student or an individual, one thing is really it's important to understand oneself. Understand what are my strengths, where are my areas or maybe deficiencies that I can build on, because there are certain skill sets that are not taught in the school curriculum sometimes, right? Things sometimes like time management, organization, and prioritization, etc. As one grows and there's so much more to manage, in higher school and education systems and all, right? One needs to be able to manage a lot more on one's plate. Yeah. So I think understanding, oneself and finding solutions. Sometimes it's about looking for what are some of the resources as well, right? So the resources can come from within or outside, externally. So don't be afraid always. Don't always feel that one has to rely on oneself. Be open to seeking help from others. There are always people around, be it family, parents, right? Be it peers, be it teachers or other adults around. So sometimes it's really to be able to gather support and see if that ask for help from people around if the need arises. Yeah.
Okay. So to summarize, I think that also ties in nicely with our campaign as well. We talk about both external and internal measures. It's not always about you trying to go through a brick wall. Sometimes you need to have some external support as well. While of course changing your perspective to failure, building your self-esteem like you mentioned as well. Being aware of your strengths, not comparing your weaknesses with other strengths, for example. Yeah. Okay, so thank you, Dr. Lim. Yeah, that's about it for today. If you have enjoyed, I hope that you have taken some value back from this session. If you have, do share. Do go on Instagram, follow us, like our Facebook page. There are a couple of links around that will be in this video. At the same time, of course, if you're interested in the content that we have an event coming up on 14 April. 13 April. Yes, 13 April is a Saturday from 5 to 7 p.m. where we will be inviting experts from different fields to talk about this topic of resilience, mental health, and it's a free event. Okay, Singaporeans like free stuff, right? It's a free event. Look out for more details. And yes, so with that, thank you very much and stay resilient.